Hello everyone, this is Nitin Bayani and I'm here for you to help with the SoapUI. And so here's the SoapUI tutorial we have that has been created just for you guys. So we'll go over the basics first and then we'll jump over SoapUI and see how those are implemented and how those are effective, how those can be utilized, how you can make use of what we are discussing right now in the tutorial. So my first slide is the basics of web service. What is a web service? So a web service, is something that is available over the internet or a private network that uses a standardized XML messaging system, is not tied to any one of operating systems or programming language, is self-describing via common XML grammar, is discoverable via simple find mechanics. What does this mean? So this is any service that is available. The service should be available either in your private network, it could be your office, your home, your local network, your WAN, or it could be available on World Wide Web, so for everybody to be able to access it. Something, that interacts with the backend and the front end. So it's a middle tier between the front end that we see and the back end, like databases and servers and everything that we have in the back. And the service interacts with these backends, and then everything that we see on a UI, everything is transmitted through an XML message. So the communication happens between the backend and the front end, but the middle tier is the service calls that we make that actually do the functional work. And what we see on the GUI is a representation of the XML messages that we are getting back. It is not tied to any operating system, so you could use Mac, you could use Windows or any operating system available in the market. It's not tied to any programming language, which means the web services can be built in any known language. It could be Ruby, Java, Groovy, anything, any programming language, doesn't matter. So web service is pretty much very self-explanatory. It describes what's going to be doing. So it has an XML grammar, which is very easy to read, similar to like HTML. So if you're just looking at XML, you will have a very good idea of what the XML request or response is, taking or giving you back. So this is what basically a web service is. Let's go a little more in detail. So when we say web services, we say what kind of web service calls we make. The most common that we use are the SOAP and the REST services call. So web service is a broad term, is a method of communicating between two applications or electronic devices over the World Wide Web. The web services are of two kinds. That's not true. It's just the mostly used ones, which is the simple object access protocol, which is the SOAP. And the second one is the representational state transfer, which is the REST. We also call REST as the RESTful services. So the type of web services I was talking about, we have the SOAP and the REST, which I use the most, but we also have the JMS, other protocols like JDBC, AMF, XML RPC. So what a SOAP web service is, let's go in more details now. What a SOAP web service is. So SOAP defines a standard communication protocol, set of rules, specifications for XML-based messaging system. SOAP uses different transfer protocols such as HTTP, SMTP. The standard protocol of HTTP makes it easier for SOAP models to tunnel across firewalls and proxies without any modifications to the SOAP protocol. SOAP can sometimes be slower than the middleware technologies like Cobra or ICE due to its verbiage and XML format. So, it's pretty simple. We're using a simple access protocol. Basically uses XML, and we transfer or transmit our data using protocols like HTTP and SMTP. So simple mail if you're using for mailing, or HTTP if you're using over your browser. And when using your browser and internal network, right, there are proxies that you have to build to support those, or there are firewalls, so it's pretty easy to work with SOAP services. It's pretty easy to build a proxy on top of a SOAP service, to help with the security, or for the firewalls, you can, whitelist your services endpoint and everything like that. It's pretty easy. So the RESTful service. The RESTful service is a set of architectural principles by which data can be transmitted over a standardized interface such as HTTP. REST does not contain an additional messaging layer and focuses on design rules for creating stateless services. So when we say RESTful services, we also call them as stateless services, which means, if you restart your server in the middle, you still would be able to use your REST call, any REST call that's there. So it stays stateless. It should still work. It's not like a SOAP service where if you are in the middle and you restart your servers, you have to go back and then restart. So you should still be able to use your REST call anywhere. So it doesn't have a state, doesn't maintain any state. So if you can basically don't need anything, you just need a URI, which is, for the service, for you to be able to configure a REST service, run the service, with the new resource representation, the client is safe to transfer state while accessing the RESTful resources with HTTP protocols. The URL of the resources servers as the resource identifier and get, put, delete, post, and head are the standard HTTP operations to be performed on the resource. What does this mean? So when you make a call using your REST service, or if you're trying to get a data, or you're trying to add a data, or you're trying to delete something, you use different HTTP protocols for that. So get is something you're trying to retrieve. Post is something you could, make it more secure, can, similar to what get does, but also can be used to add data. It's not just to get the data, it could use both to retrieve the data and add the data. Put is, when you're adding something. Delete is when you want to delete. So you use all these protocols. Like head is very similar to get, but the difference is you're going to see when you see the response, because it doesn't contain any, envelope when in the response and things like that. We'll go over the HTTP protocols, and we'll go over the differences between REST and SOAP services. So REST versus SOAP. So RESTful web services are stateless, which means, they do not maintain a state. You can test this condition by restarting the server and checking if interactions survive. That's what we were talking about. For more server RESTful web service provide a good caching infrastructure or an HTTP GET. This can improve the performance if the information the service returns is not altered frequently and is not dynamic. So what does this mean? You cannot cache a REST service, which means, if you have a browser open, caching, you can cache RESTful services, but you cannot cache posts. You can cache like a get calls. So we'll go on those in details. And since it is stateless, it is lightweight and comparatively faster. So this can improve the performance. Service producers and consumer must understand the context and content being passed along, as there is no standard set for rules to describe REST web services. So there is no rule when you describing a REST service. So you can pretty much define anything that you like. REST is useful for redirected profile devices such as mobile, for which the overhead for additional parameters are less. Example headers. So it's mostly used for mobile. A lot of people are going with the REST now. Those services are easy to integrate with existing websites and are exposed with XML, so the HTML pages can consume the same with ease. So we do see a HTML page, and in the backend we have a REST call, which is an XML, so it can easily consume an XML that it's receiving or getting back from the call, the service call. So you might have to do a little bit of refactoring, so all those things are there. So the REST-based implementation is simple when you compare it to a SOAP. So the SOAP service actually requires a WSDL, and WSDL is a contract, and in the contract everything is defined, as to what the bindings, operations, location, messages, HTTP protocols, everything that's going to be used, everything is defined in the WSDL. And and when running SOAP service, it actually requires less plumbing code than the REST services design. Example, the transaction security, coordinations, addressing, and trust. So we can say at times SOAP is better, and at times REST is better. Depends on what you're trying to achieve. So SOAP supports several protocols and techniques, including WSDL, XSDs, and WS addressing. So WSDL I've already covered. It's a contract, and every time you make a change to the WSDL, now you have to version it, and then you have to create a new XSD. XSD is nothing, it's a list of attributes or some items that are going to be processed, transferred. Similarly, WS addressing, you have to share all these details with anybody who's going to be consuming the SOAP service. Similarly, when I talk about testing and the SoapUI, so when testing the SOAP service, you will require WSDL. So if you do not have a WSDL, you do not have access to a SOAP service. If I give you an endpoint, you might be able to retrieve the WSDL with that endpoint, and might not be able to do that. Depends on if the WSDL is deployed at the endpoint that is provided. REST, on the other hand, if you just have a URI, if you know the URI and you have the endpoint, you can pretty much make a call. You do not require any WSDL. Although when you create a project for REST in SoapUI, it will automatically create a WSDL for you. And you can pretty much pass anything in the request. Depends on if you're using get, post, put, delete, whatever you're using, what HTTP operation you use. We'll go over those in detail. We'll open up SoapUI, look at an example for the SOAP and REST service, see the differences, see how this looks different, and what are the benefits of using one of those two, and how to test these. So we did talk about the HTTP methods. These HTTP methods are used for both SOAP and REST services. So what are the differences? So GET. So the GET method requests a representation of specified resource. Request using GET should only retrieve data. So when we're making a GET call, it's pretty much clear with the name itself that you're trying to get something out of something. It's like you're trying to retrieve a data. So you're making a call to a database, to a third-party service, to a server, and you're trying to retrieve something. You're making a GET call. Head, very, very similar to the GET, but the head method asks for a response identical to that of a GET request, but without the response body. So you're getting it right. So GET has a response body versus when you have a head, you do not really need a response body or envelope to send a request, or it doesn't specify envelope response like XML for head. For post method is used to submit an entity to a specified resource, often causing a change in state or side effects on the server. Post is something if you want to post something, you want to publish something. If you have live on a website, you want to post, the live content that is there, you'll probably use a post. Also, post can also be used to get the data, or to retrieve the data from the sources. Post is a little different from get, because get can only get the data, post can both get and post the data. Post is used to make it more secure, because you cannot cache post responses versus you can always cache the get responses. So where the security is, you try to use post. Put, on the other hand, is if you're trying to replace something. So if you have a data A and you want to replace the data with data B, so you're probably going to use a put call, and that's going to update the data or add the data. Delete, as the name specifies, you can delete the data or specify delete a record or something using the delete. Similarly, we have connect, options, trace, and patch. The most common that we use are the get, post, put, and delete. So now let's go over in detail as to what a get method versus what a post method is. So note that the string query, is going to be the name and the value pair. So if you have a get URI, it's going to be basically test demo, and then you're going to be passing all the values in the URL. So value 1, value 2, till whatever values you want to pass, you're going to pass it in the URL. So so you can always bookmark these get URLs. So get request can be cached, as we discussed. Get requests remain in the browser history. You can cache it in the browser history. So you can go back to the browser history, open the get request again. Get request can be bookmarked. You can bookmark it. Can never be used when dealing with sensitive data, so it's not very secure when using get. Requests have length restrictions, so there is a restriction on the length. Request should be used only to retrieve data, so you can use it only to retrieve the data. Post, on the other hand, you don't have to pass everything in the request, but you can pass all the values in the post body, and it doesn't have any restrictions on what all you can pass. You can pass any length. It cannot be cached. It's good. You cannot cache it. You cannot store it. You cannot bookmark it. There's no restrictions on the data length. So there are a lot of advantages when using post. It's more secure. So that's the get put. Now we'll go over the SoapUI. So over here in the ReadyAPI or the SoapUI, we're just going to see a few things. We'll go over SoapUI in detail in the later tutorial, but for now we'll just take an example of SOAP service and a REST service and show you the differences. So you see this is a SOAP binding. So, and the SOAP binding has, there are two different calls that we can make: send mail, get, service status. And if I double click this, it has a WSDL URL. So if you see, it's a WSDL stored at this location. So we have a WSDL, which means, and we'll have everything defined in the WSDL. That's the service endpoint. You can update the endpoints. WSDL content will have XSD, bindings, port, messages, schema, simple types, messages. When I say messages, what it can do, it can use get calls and send calls. Get messages and send messages. Schema is defined. Global elements, you just by looking at it, you can pretty much know, what the responses are going to be. So everything is defined. Support, the binding is there. If you look at the WSDL, get a pretty good idea. It supports certain regions, there's some documentation in there. So that's it. It's a SOAP service. Now let's look at a REST service. So over here in this project, there are actually SOAP and REST both. So this defines, the SOAP service has a WSDL, and then similarly we can go and check the WSDL content here, and we'll have all the schema messages, bindings, and everything. And for the REST, you pretty much just have a URI. So this is the URI, dish API, catalog, kettle chunk, lineup, just package. And it could have multiple calls. Here we have a get, so we can get certain thing back. Similarly, for there are examples, other examples here. I would say this is all I using pretty much the get calls. So if I was talking about WSDL and variables, so if you see for a REST project or the service, we have a variable. For the services SOAP, we have the WSDLs. Now the variable will pretty much have the things that are defined, stored, and that we have run. So the resources, methods, and representations, you can find those details here in the variable. This gets automatically created. If you have a URI, you're going to build a project based on a URI, and pretty much that's going to automatically build the variable here. So let me give you an example. So this is a SOAP call, and it's an XML, and then you pass all the parameters that are required. So view type, you can do all mandatory, and data, or mandatory and data, or all, and then you can pass in, the required parameters. And once you run this with a valid endpoint, it will give you a valid response back. For REST, on the other hand, I could update this data. So I could add anything here, run this if these parameters exist. And if I'm passing all these details, we're going to get a good response back based on what we are requesting. So we are trying to do a get. Let's go over the protocols in a little more detail. So if you see here, these are all the supported get, put, post, delete, get Bitcoin, all those. These are defined for this in the variable. So all these methods are defined, so we can see if there is a put, post, and get that we're using here. So I could go back and add more if I want to, like delete. But if the delete doesn't exist, and so the service is not going to allow me to delete, so I'm going to get a different response back saying, it's not valid or something like that. So this is just example of what a WSDL, variable, SOAP, and a REST service looks like, request and responses. So that's it for today. In the next session, we'll go over in detail for the SoapUI. We'll try to cover all the SoapUI topics in details, which is a SoapUI NG Pro, what comes with it, where you can download it, how to get licensed, and what is the cost, and what the product comes with, what are the agenda, what are the preferences, how you can set SoapUI preferences, events, properties, other details, We'll go over test suite, test cases, how to add a session, how to create a load test, create a mock service for a REST and SOAP calls. In details, we'll go over all these things in the next tutorial. So thanks for watching. Goodbye.